The thermostat kept rising even though she lowered it. At first, Eliza thought it was a glitch, an ordinary hiccup of the old unit perched in the corner of her apartment's living room. She pressed the buttons again, up and down, but the display stubbornly climbed. 82, 84, 87 degrees. She ran her fingers over the plastic casing. It was cool to the touch, but the air around her skin was heavy, oppressive, like a blanketing weight pressing down from the ceiling. The apartment was otherwise still. Streetlights outside painted long, lazy rectangles across the walls, and the hum of a distant traffic light pulsed through the floor. The kitchen clock ticked in uneven intervals, or maybe it was her imagination. Even small sounds seemed muted, as if the air itself had thickened. Eliza reached for the wall fan, hoping to stir some movement, some relief. The blades spun lazily, cutting the air with a soft whirring. But the warmth did not relent. It clung to her skin. She lifted her arms, brushing sweat from her forehead. Her sweater stuck uncomfortably to her shoulders, the fabric seeming to radiate heat it shouldn't. It was subtle at first, the light shimmer of unease that comes with noticing a slight anomaly. The thermostat read 90. She had lowered it to 68. She pressed the button again. Nothing. The numbers climbed. 92, 94. Eliza moved from room to room, testing the temperature, touching objects as if confirming the reality of her environment. The metal frame of the refrigerator door was lukewarm. The wooden counterboards felt as if the sun had baked them from inside. She pressed her palms against the walls. They hummed softly, a low vibration that made her chest tighten. She glanced at the window. The night was unchanged outside. Dark, silent, perfectly ordinary. She could see her own reflection in the glass, but it seemed subtly wrong. Her face glistened more than it should have, her eyes glassy in a way that didn't match the mild fan-blown air she had felt moments before. The reflection smiled slightly, though she did not. By the time the thermostat hit 98, Eliza's breathing had grown shallow, cautious. She wrapped herself in a towel and tried to bathe her face in cool water, but even the sink faucet seemed to radiate warmth, and the droplets burned faintly against her skin. The room's air shimmered in the corners of her vision. The edges of objects blurred as if heat waves from a desert stretched them. She sat on the edge of the sofa, pressing her feet into the carpet, trying to ground herself. But the fibers pressed back unnaturally, resisting her weight. She lifted her hand to touch the armrest, then recoiled. The wood had heated. Too hot. Impossible. She had not turned on any appliance. The oven was off, the stovetop cold. The apartment lights flickered, the dim bulbs struggling against some unseen resistance. Shadows in the corners wavered, stretching up the walls and bending around the furniture like smoke. Eliza's own shadow lagged behind her movements, as if reluctant to follow, and she caught herself staring at it longer than she should have. She blinked. The apartment was empty, yet she felt pressed from every side. She returned to the thermostat, fingers hovering over the buttons. She pushed off, then cool, then fan. Nothing. The numbers kept climbing. 102, 104, 107. The digits flickered like embers before her eyes. A smell rose from the walls. Faint, metallic, like heated iron. She gagged and stumbled toward the hall, rubbing her nose. The hallway felt narrower, the heat pressing from the walls on both sides. Pictures hung crookedly, their glass panes too hot to touch. She glanced at her hands, now slick with sweat, the skin flushed, the veins visible beneath a sheen of warmth. Her pulse thumped in her ears, a deep, insistent drum echoing across the apartment. Eliza tried the bedroom. She opened the door, and a wave of air that shouldn't have existed rolled out. The bedspread radiated heat. Her pillows burned beneath her fingertips. The thermostat read 110. She staggered back, clutching the doorframe. Her vision blurred, the room bending, folding around itself. In the corner, the shadows pooled thickly, then swirled toward her. She blinked. They stayed where they were. The bathroom faucet hissed when she turned it, as if protesting the sudden contact with her skin. Steam, or maybe hallucination, curled up from the tiles, carrying the smell of scorched metal and something faintly organic. She cupped her hands under the flow, but the water was lukewarm, almost tepid against her burning skin. When she withdrew them, tiny droplets sizzled faintly where they landed on her forearms. Her breathing hitched. The room's boundaries seemed to waver, stretching too high, then compressing too low. She turned toward the mirror. Her reflection shifted. The air around her shimmered, and the reflected apartment's edges appeared to melt. Her own face glistened with sweat that felt like condensation forming inside the glass. She thought she saw heat rising from her own head, a faint distortion in the air, like a heat wave above a summer asphalt road. The thermostat read 115. Her muscles screamed with the effort of standing, though the air's pressure felt like it was pushing against her chest. Eliza felt her mind tightening, focus narrowing to a single point. Survive, survive, survive. She moved toward the balcony's sliding door, desperate for open air, for a breath of cold night. The door was locked. She fumbled with the handle, heart hammering, sweat running into her eyes. Finally, it yielded. She stepped onto the balcony. The night air struck her like a wall, but it did not cool her. The temperature in the apartment pressed upward, relentless. She looked out over the city below, all the lights dull and shimmering in the heat haze. Then she felt it, not just heat, but intent. The apartment itself seemed aware of her struggle, of her attempts to regain control. The walls pulsed against her palms as she leaned over the railing. Objects in the room quivered, flicked shadows into the night. The thermostat display blinked, then glowed white-hot. 120, 122, 125. The balcony railing stung her hands. The tiles beneath her feet seemed to pulse with the rising warmth. Her reflection in the glass door shimmered again. She thought she saw something moving behind her, not in shadow, not in form, just a distortion, a vibration in the air that followed her movements, mocking her attempts to escape. Eliza turned, stomach sinking, realizing she couldn't leave. Every exit seemed trapped by the heat itself, a physical force resisting motion. She dropped to the floor, pressing her forehead to the coolest patch she could find, near the refrigerator. But even that surface radiated warmth that was climbing steadily. The thermostat ticked upward. 128, 130, 132. Her thoughts became fragmented. Numbers, heat, walls, sweat, air, flickering lights. An endless cycle pressing her toward some inevitable revelation. She could no longer tell if the warmth was coming from the unit, the apartment, herself, or if it had been inside all along. She pressed her hands to her ears, trying to block the hum, the pulse, the unseen vibration that pressed from the walls. But the sound seeped through anyway. Low, steady, insistent, a rhythm she could not escape. And in the back of her mind, buried beneath fear, a thought uncoiled. The heat was revealing something. Not her, not her apartment, but something older, something waiting, locked beneath the veneer of the everyday. Eliza lifted her eyes. The thermostat read 135. The numbers flickered and warped. The room shimmered around her. Shadows moved in the corners, bending light and air. The heat rose like tidewater, pressing her into awareness of something vast and patient. Something in the walls, in the appliances, in the very air she breathed, that had been waiting for the moment she noticed. She could not move, could not call for help, could not understand. All she could do was watch, and the air pressed closer, thick with revelation. The thermostat's numbers climbed. 138, 140, and in the heat, Eliza understood that the apartment was not simply rising in temperature. It was becoming. Her shadow moved before she did. Clara noticed it the moment she turned toward the kitchen. The hallway light flickered overhead, spilling pale yellow rectangles across the floor. She paused, reaching for the doorknob, and froze. Her shadow had already stepped forward, stretching its long, thin limbs toward the kitchen, a fraction of a second ahead of her. She frowned, blinking. The light from the fixture hummed, low and uneven, and the floorboards beneath her bare feet creaked with the familiar softness of a quiet apartment. The shadow hadn't lagged, it had anticipated. Her fingers hovered over the knob. Nothing touched her yet, and the shadow already rested against the edge of the doorway. Clara shook her head, attributing it to tiredness, a trick of the half-light, the long day that had left her eyes raw. She turned again, slowly, and the shadow obeyed, following the trajectory of her body, but always a heartbeat ahead, curling around the corners before she did, folding itself along walls and furniture with impossible precision. She stepped fully into the hallway. The apartment smelled faintly of dust and old carpet, faintly antiseptic from the cleaning spray she'd used days ago. The shadow shifted again. She tried moving left. The shadow did too, but first, it slid along the wall, brushing the baseboards, and paused as if examining a rug she had not yet reached. Clara's pulse picked up. The apartment, usually silent at this hour except for the occasional traffic rumble from outside, seemed to hold its breath. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen became louder, more insistent. She felt a prickle on her neck, skin crawling. Her shadow, it wasn't lagging, it wasn't glitching. It was aware. She turned abruptly toward the living room. The shadow shifted again, leading the way. It reached the window, arms stretching along the wall before she even moved. She pressed her back against the doorway, trying to ground herself. Was it her mind? She had been working late, skipping sleep for the past week. Exhaustion played tricks, but the shadows of the furniture, the curtain edges, even the streaks of dust caught in the dim lamplight, they remained still. Only hers moved ahead, confident, deliberate. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Its second hand seemed sluggish, dragging through the air, but the shadow moved in perfect rhythm. She stepped toward the kitchen counter, the shadow already reaching for the cabinets, bending over as if it were rifling through their contents. Clara's stomach dropped. There was no one else. No one had been in the apartment. And yet, the shape that mimicked her, anticipating her movements, existed in the same physical space. Her reflection in the refrigerator door wavered. At first, she thought it was the dim light, the angle of the stainless steel. But when she moved closer, the distortion became subtle but undeniable. Her mirrored self blinked late, its lips curling in a way she hadn't yet moved. She flinched. The shadow in front of her paused, then shifted, gliding along the floorboards toward the hallway. "Stop!" she whispered, almost ashamed of the tremor in her voice. Nothing. The shadow obeyed only in its own terms, inching along, brushing her fingers against the edge of the rug before she could reach them. She tried to track it, following with slow, careful steps, but the sensation of watching herself, of being anticipated, prickled under her skin like the press of cold fingernails. The overhead light flickered again, longer this time, and Clara noticed the shadows of the furniture stretching incorrectly. The sofa's legs reached too far. The kitchen table warped slightly toward the hallway. Her own shadow moved through the warping space, bending in ways that felt physically impossible. She touched the wall. It was solid, familiar, but the shadow slipped through the corner of the room as if space were no longer obeying its own rules. She tried to ignore it. She busied herself with chores, washing dishes, straightening cushions, turning off lamps. But every time she shifted, the shadow anticipated, moving ahead, curling around corners, touching surfaces before her. And always, it moved with intention. Sometimes it paused where her reflection did not match. Sometimes it gestured in directions her body hadn't yet contemplated. A soft sound reached her from the far end of the apartment. Perhaps the breeze brushing the balcony door? Or a distant car. The sound lagged slightly behind her movements, delayed, as if time itself was bending around the apartment. She froze. The shadow continued, fluid and deliberate. She wasn't sure whether it was watching her, or leading her somewhere, or both. Clara moved toward the bedroom, each step measured, careful. Her shadow entered first, settling against the far wall, long and black, coiled around the corner. She stepped inside. The light bulb above her flickered, and for a moment she swore the shadow shifted independently of the ceiling lamp's rhythm. Then it stretched, arms reaching for the dresser before she had the courage to approach. She held her breath. Her own body, in that instant, felt heavier, slower, as if resisting a force she could not name. The mirror on the dresser drew her attention. The reflection trembled. She stepped closer. Her mirrored self blinked after her, lips moving just a fraction too late. She recoiled, heart hammering. The shadow twisted in front of the mirror, brushing along the frame as though inspecting the reflection itself. It mimicked her in shape but not in timing, in nuance, in intention. Her palms were slick with sweat. She pressed them against the cool dresser surface, grounding herself. But the apartment's air seemed to thrum with quiet expectation. The shadows of the furniture bent slightly toward her shadow, toward that independent shape. She swallowed. The apartment no longer felt like a home. It felt like a stage, and she was both actor and audience to something she did not yet understand. The light in the hallway flickered again, casting a long rectangle into the bedroom. The shadow moved into it, coiling and stretching. Clara stepped back. She realized, suddenly, that every decision, every movement, had been anticipated. Not by her mind, but by something else entirely, something patient and observant, something waiting to test her reaction. She turned quickly toward the door. The shadow anticipated, already curling through the hallway, brushing against the wall, sliding toward the kitchen. Clara felt the air shift. There was a pressure, imperceptible but insistent, as if the apartment itself leaned toward the shadow, giving it space to act. She stepped toward the balcony door. The shadow paused, fingers brushing the threshold. She paused, turned, facing her. Not quite a mirror, not quite independent, but something in between, watching, learning. Her heartbeat accelerated. She wanted to call out, to scream. Her lips trembled. The shadow mirrored her, but not entirely. It tilted slightly, leaning, reaching, moving ahead, always ahead. She realized with a sinking certainty that it was not simply a copy. It was evolving, becoming, and she did not know what it intended, or whether the apartment would allow her to leave before she understood. Clara's bare feet pressed into the carpet. She inched back toward the bedroom, toward the dim safety of light and walls she thought she knew. But the shadow moved with her, a step ahead, pausing to inspect her hesitation. She lifted her hands, trembling. The shadow raised its own, a moment before her, fingers stretching, curling. She realized she no longer controlled her own body in the apartment's rhythm. A deep, unnameable expectation pressed against her chest. Her shadow waited in the doorway, stretching long and black across the floorboards. It moved with purpose. She did not know what that purpose was, and she feared she might never find out. She took a slow breath. The shadow mirrored her action, but before she could exhale fully, it stepped forward again, leading her into the hallway, into the apartment that seemed to bend around it. Clara understood, in that still moment, that she was no longer leading, no longer initiating. She was following, and the shadow had decided the path.